Today I am going to talk about organizational development. After I finish my lesson, you will know about the developments made in organizations, what changes were made to make developments in organization, and how do these changes by development theories help in the development of organizations. Let me begin by introducing to you organizational development. Organizational development, or OD as it is called, is a field of research, theory and practice dedicated to expanding the knowledge and effectiveness of people to accomplish more successful organizational change and performance. OD is a process of continuous diagnosis, action planning, implementation and evaluation with the goal of transferring knowledge and skills to organizations to improve their capacity for solving problems and managing future changes. Experts might agree that the following definitions of OD that I am going to tell you would represent the major focus and thrust of many of today's OD practitioners. Let us begin. Organizational development is the attempt to influence the members of an organization to expand their candidness with each other about their views of the organization and their experience in it, and also to take greater responsibility for their actions as organization members. The assumption behind OD is that when people pursue both of these objectives simultaneously, they are likely to discover new ways of working together and they experience as more effective for achieving their own and their shared, that is the organizational goals, and that when this does not happen, such activity helps them to understand why and to make meaningful choices about what to do in light of this understanding. The definition that I have given you just now was given by Nielsen. Organization development is a system-wide application of behavioral science, knowledge to the planned development and reinforcement of organizational strategies, structures and processes for improving an organization's effectiveness. This definition was given by Cummings and Worley. Another definition which was given by Matt Minahan was organizational development is a body of knowledge and practice that enhances organizational performance and individual development, viewing the organization as a complex system of systems that exist within a larger system, each of which has its own attributes and degrees of alignment. OD interventions in these systems are inclusive methodologies and approaches to strategic planning, organization design, leadership development, change management, performance management, coaching, diversity and work-life balance. Moving on to the history of organizational development theory. Organizational development emerged out of human relations studies from the 1930s, where psychologists realized that organizational structures and processes influence workers' behavior and his motivation level. Levin's work in the 1940s and 50s also helped show that feedback was a valuable tool in addressing social processes. More recently, work on OD has expanded to focus on aligning organizations with their rapidly changing and complex environments through organizational learning, knowledge management, and transformation of organizational norms and values. I am going to talk about the key concepts of organizational development theory. There are some key concepts of organizational development theories which actually help in governing these theories. These are: number 1, the organizational climate; number 2, the organizational culture; and number 3, the organizational strategies. We will begin with organizational climate. Research on organizational climate can be traced back to the 1930s with the human relations movement pioneered by Hawthorne researchers turned their attention from the hard physical environment to the soft psychological environment. Thus, the concept of organizational climate was born. The first researcher to initiate studies in this area was Kurt Lewin, the founder of group dynamics. In his famous leadership style study, Lewin applied three different leadership styles: democracy, autocracy and laissez-faire, to create a different group atmosphere. And he was the first to propose the concept of organizational climate. However, he failed in his attempt to define the climate. Later, 4chan outlined three features of organizational climate. Firstly, it varies among different organizations. Secondly, it is persistent. And lastly, it affects the behavior of organizational members. Since Lewin in 2001 proposed the empirical study of organizational climate, studies in this area were proliferated. Lewin defined organizational climate as a group of measurable characteristics that members could perceive directly or indirectly in the work environment. And as a description of environmental factors, it could help researchers ascertain the effects of environment on employee motivation. In addition, organizational climate was the most common variable applied to description of the organizational context. As a description of individuals' perception of organization, organizational climate was more similar to the real behavior than to the real environment. As a result of the interaction between organization and environment, organizational climate was rich in content. Using different operational definitions, researchers tended to select different atmosphere dimensions in their studies. Aguirre's classification of the organizational environment has been the most widely recognized. He classified the organizational environment into four dimensions, namely ecology, background, social system and culture. And he speculated that organizational climate is the sum total of the organizational characteristics of a group which results from the interaction of the four dimensions. When investigating organizational climate, we should select variables from the four dimensions. Now, ecology refers to organizational material resources, including equipment, materials, instruments, construction and finance. Background environment covers all the background characteristics of an organization's members, including their socio-economic status, education level, self-concept of members and so on. Social system represents the interaction between formal and informal roles in organizations, including administrative organization, guidance programs, interaction between leaders and members, decision making and participation models. Cultures relate to contained norms, belief systems, values, cognitive structures and so on. Organizational climate, sometimes known as corporate climate, is the process of quantifying the culture of an organization. It precedes the notion of organizational culture. It is a set of properties of the work environment perceived directly or indirectly by the employees that is assumed to be a major force in influencing employee behavior. There are two difficulties in defining organizational climate. Number one, how to define the climate, and number two, how to measure it effectively on different levels of analysis. Furthermore, there are several approaches to the concept of climate. Two in particular have received substantial patronage: the cognitive schema approach and the shared perception approach. The cognitive schema approach regards the concept of a climate as an individual perception and cognitive representation of the work environment. From this perspective, climate assessments should be conducted at an individual level. The shared perception approach emphasizes the importance of shared perceptions as underpinning the notion of climate. Organizational climate has been defined as the shared perception of the way things are around here. There is a great deal of overlap in these two approaches. Moving on to organizational culture. Organizational culture tends to be shared by all or most members of some social group. It is something that older members usually try to pass on to the younger members, shape behavior and structures perceptions of the world. Cultures are often studied and understood at a national level, such as the Indian culture or the American or French culture. Culture includes deeply held values, beliefs and assumptions, symbols, heroes and rituals. Culture can be examined at an organizational level as well. The main distinction between organizational and national culture is that people can choose to join a place of work but are usually born into a national culture. Organizational climate, on the other hand, is often defined as a recurring pattern of behavior, attitudes and feelings that characterize life in an organization. While an organizational culture tends to be deep and stable. Although culture and climate are related, climate often proves easier to assess and change. At an individual level of analysis, the concept is called individual psychological climate. These individual perceptions are often aggregated or collected for analysis and understanding at the team or group level or the divisional, functional or overall organizational level. The 5 basic elements of a culture in organization include 1. Assumptions, 2. Values, 3. Behavioral norms, 4. Behavioral patterns, 5. Artifacts. The subjective features, that is the assumptions, values and norms, reflect members' unconscious thoughts and interpretations of their organizations. The subjective features shape the behavior and artifacts that take on within the organization. Several methods have been used to classify organizational culture. While there is no single type of organizational culture and organizational cultures vary widely from one organization to the next, commonalities do exist, and some researchers have developed models to describe different indicators of organizational cultures. Let's talk about some of them. Hofstede looked for differences between over 1,60,000 IBM employees in 50 different countries and 3 regions of the world. Actually, he was trying to make an attempt to find aspects of culture that might influence business behavior. He suggested things about cultural differences existing in regions and nations and the importance of international awareness and multiculturalism for the own cultural introspection. Cultural differences reflect differences in thinking and social action and even in mental programs, a term Hofstede uses for predictable behavior. He relates culture to ethnic and regional groups, but also organizations, profession, family to society and subcultural groups, national political systems and legislation, etc. Hofstede suggested that the need for changing mental programs with changing behavior first, which leads to value change. Through certain groups like the Jews, Gypsies and Basques have maintained their identity throughout centuries, their values show adaptation to the dominant cultural environment. Hofstede demonstrated that there are national and regional cultural groupings that affect the behavior of organizations and identified 4 dimensions of culture in his study of national cultures. Now, these 4 dimensions are: number 1, power distance. Different societies find different solutions on social inequality. Although invisible, inside organizations, power inequality of the boss subordinate relationships is functional, and according to Hofstede, reflects the way inequality is addressed in the society. According to the Mulder's power distance reduction theory, subordinates will try to reduce the power distance between themselves and their bosses, and the bosses will try to maintain or in fact enlarge it. But there is also a degree to which a society expects there to be differences in the levels of power. A high score suggests that there is an expectation that some individuals wield larger amounts of power than others. A low score reflects the view that all people should have equal rights. Uncertainty avoidance. This is the coping with uncertainty about the future. Society copes with it with technology, law and religion. However, different societies have different ways of addressing it. And according to Hofstede, organizations deal with it with technology, law and rituals in 2 ways. One is the rational way of dealing and the other is non-rational, with the rituals being the non-rational ones. Hofstede listed some of the rituals as the memos and reports, some parts of the accounting system, large parts of planning and control systems, and nomination of experts. Moving on to the third point, which is individualism versus collectivism. Disharmony of interests on personal and collective goals. Hofstede brings about the idea that society's expectations of individualism or collectivism will be reflected by the employees inside the organization. Collectivist societies like India will have more emotional dependence on members in their organizations. When in equilibrium, organization is expected to show responsibility on its members. Extreme individualism, as is seen in the US. In fact, collectivism in the US is seen as bad. Other societies and cultures see it as something which is a positive point. US will therefore seek to resolve social and organizational problems in ways different from the other countries which are collectivist. Hofstede says that a capitalist market economy fosters individualism and competition and depends on it, but individualism is also related to the development of the middle class. Masculinity versus femininity. This reflects whether a certain society is predominantly male or female in terms of cultural values, gender roles and power relations. And finally, long versus short term orientation, in which he describes as a long term orientation dimension can be interpreted as dealing with society's search for virtue. So, societies with a short term orientation generally have a strong concern with establishing the absolute truth. They are normative in their thinking. They exhibit great respect for traditions, a relatively small propensity to save for the future, and a focus on achieving quick results. In societies with a long-term orientation, people believe that truth depends very much on the situation, context and time. They show an ability to adapt traditions to changed conditions, a strong propensity to save and invest, thriftiness and perseverance in achieving results. Now I am going to talk about organizational strategies, or we can say that the application of organizational development theories. A common OD approach used to help organizations negotiate change, that is, action research, consists of 4 steps. Number 1, diagnosis. Diagnosis helps organizations identify problems that may interfere with its effectiveness and assess the causes. This is usually done by OD enlisting the help of an outside specialist to help identify problems by examining its mission, goals, policies, structures and technologies, climate and culture, environmental factors, desired outcomes and readiness to take action, and usually done through key informant interviews or formal surveys of all the members. The next is action planning. Action planning is the strategic interventions for addressing diagnosed problems, and these interventions are developed in action planning. The organization is engaged in an action planning process to assess the feasibility of implementing different change strategies that lead to action. Number 3 is interventions. Change steps are specified and sequenced, progress is monitored, and stakeholder commitment is cultivated. Finally comes the step of evaluation. Assess the planned change efforts by tracking the organization's progress in implementing the change and by documenting its impact on the organization. Moving on to evaluation of organizational development. The nature and needs of organizations are changing dramatically. Correspondingly, the profession of organizational development has also been changing to meet the changing needs of the organizations. Therefore, it may be most useful to consider several definitions of organizational development. I am going to give you a standard definition first. For many years, the following definition that I am going to give you has been considered the standard definition, and it was developed in 1969 at a time when organization was considered to be much like a stable machine comprised of interlocking parts. OD is an effort planned organization wide and managed from top to increase organizational effectiveness and health through planned interventions in the organization's processes using behavioral science knowledge. Moving on to the core values. Underlying organizational development are humanistic values. Marcus and Rai articulated the humanistic values of OD as following. Number 1, providing opportunities for people to function as human beings rather than as resources in the production process. Number 2, providing opportunities for each organizational member as well as for organization itself to develop to their full potential. Number 3, seeking to increase the effectiveness of an organization in terms of its goals. Number 4, attempting to create an environment in which it is possible to find exciting and challenging work. Number 5, providing opportunities for people in the organization to influence the way in which they relate to work, to the organization and to the environment. Number 6, treating each human being as a person with a complex set of needs, all of which are important to their work and to their life. Differentiating OD from other change efforts such as operation management, training and development and technological advancements is very important. What are the objectives of organizational development? The objectives of OD are: number 1, to increase the level of interpersonal trust among the employees. Number 2, to increase employees' level of satisfaction and commitment. 3, to confront problems instead of neglecting them. 4, to effectively manage conflict. 5, to increase cooperation and collaboration among the employees. 6, to increase the organization's problem solving. 7. To put in place processes that will help improve the ongoing operation of the organization on a continuous basis. As objectives of organizational development are framed, keeping in view specific situations, they vary from one situation to another. In other words, these programs are tailored to meet the requirements of a particular situation. But broadly speaking, all organizational development programs try to achieve the following objectives. Number one, making individuals in the organizations aware of the vision of the organization. Organizational development helps in making employees align with the vision of the organization. Another objective is encouraging employees to solve problems instead of actually avoiding them. The third objective is strengthening interpersonal trust, cooperation and communication for the successful achievement of organizational goals. Another important objective is encouraging every individual to participate in the process of planning, thus making them feel responsible for the implementation of the plan. Number 5 is creating a work atmosphere in which employees are encouraged to work and participate enthusiastically. The next objective is replacing formal lines of authority with personal knowledge and skill. And finally, creating an environment of trust so that employees willingly accept change. Actually, according to the organizational development thinking, organizational development provides managers with a vehicle for introducing changes systematically by applying a broad selection of management techniques. This in turn leads to greater social, personal and organizational effectiveness. Let us summarize it. OD or organizational development is a field of research, theory and practice dedicated to expanding the knowledge and effectiveness of people to accomplish more successful organizational change and performance. Organizational development emerged out of human relations studies from the 1930s, where psychologists realized that organizational structures and processes influence worker behavior and motivation. Kurt Levin's work in the 40s and 50s also helped show that feedback was a valuable tool in addressing social processes. Diagnosis helps organizations identify problems that may actually interfere with its effectiveness and assess the causes. Strategic interventions for addressing diagnosed problems are developed, and this is called action planning. Change steps are specified and sequenced, progress is monitored and stakeholder commitment is cultivated, which is called intervention. Assess the planned change efforts by tracking the organization's progress in implementing the change, and by documenting its impact on the organization is what we can call evaluation. Organizational development is an effort planned, organization-wide and managed from the top to increase the organization's effectiveness and health through planned interventions in the organizational processes using behavioral science knowledge.